Good afternoon, all. I'm Kelly Jones. Today I'm going to talk about Sherman Alexie's novel, Part-Time Indian, and I'm particularly interested in how Alexie uses the concept of space to discuss and enhance his ideas about hybridity and especially cultural hybridity. So when you're thinking about space, when you're talking about literature, you understand that physical space is one thing that could be talked about. In this case, we've got a reservation, we've got a classroom of an all-white school, we've got a basketball court where a lot of elements of hybridity come into play. We've also got psychological space, which is where we get inside Arnold's head. And we do that via the printed text and via the drawing, so we'll talk a little bit about that too. But I'm a geek. I'm the one that likes to read all the movie credits before and after. So I was noticing that even before you open the book, you've got a suggestion of hybridity just by using part-time Indian. If he's an Indian part of the time, what is he the other part of the time? And even before the text begins, we've got a dedication where Alexie says this is for his two hometowns, Wellpinit and Reardon. So again, even before we get too much into the text, we've got that idea of occupying two spaces and how do we navigate that. So in chapter 1, the psychological space, that space inside Arnold's mind, is gone into in pretty good detail. He starts out by telling us all about his physical challenges. He was born with encephalus. He's got extra teeth, as he points out on page 2. He says, I had 10 more than usual, 10 more than normal, 10 teeth past human. This is the first instance in which we have white culture coming into contact, the first interaction we see with white culture and Indian culture. And white culture comes in the body of the Indian Health Services. That's the federal government's program that offers very limited dental care. He says he has 1 day a year, so poor Arnold has to have all 10 teeth pulled. And he said that he uses 10 teeth past human to describe him feeling as beyond human. Interestingly enough, the Indian Health Services, the white culture, marginalizes that and says that he's really half as human. They say that they only feel half the pain. Indians only feel half the pain of whites. So they give, the bastard dentist, he says, gives half the Novocaine. We go beyond that to hear that IHS will only give them one style of eyeglasses, and you only can get that once a year. So again, we've got that limitation placed on Indian culture via white culture. In that same chapter is the first time we're still in that psychological space, and Arnold is still helping us understand that he feels the need to take up drawings when words break down. He says words on page 5 are sometimes too limited, sometimes too unpredictable. So again, there's that hybridity of communication. He uses printed text to communicate in addition to drawings as well. The first one-on-one situation where we've got white culture and Indian culture and trying to establish some sense of hybridity comes later on in the chapter when Mr. P, his teacher that he used the geometry book to hit him in the nose, he comes over and talks to him. On page 35, let me find it, there we go. Mr. P says, we didn't literally kill Indians. We were supposed to make you give up being Indian. He said, your songs and stories and language and dancing, everything. He said, whites were not trying to kill Indian people. They were trying to kill Indian culture. And so Arnold has a hard time understanding what's going on with this conversation until Mr. P continues talking and kind of gives him a light bulb moment a little later on in that chapter, pages 42 and 43. He instructs him to take his hope and to go. He said, you've been fighting since you were born. You fought off brain surgery, you fought off seizures, and so on. Mr. P says, you know, a math teacher, but you have to add hope to somebody else's hope. Arnold begins to think, I've got to multiply hope. Arnold asks, where is hope? Who has hope? Son, Mr. P says, you're going to find more and more hope the farther and farther you walk away from this sad, sad reservation. So we've got the idea of mobility. And so that leads to the idea of Alexie's use of physical space to demonstrate hybridity. Arnold makes the decision to travel 22 miles, and he is headed to high school. And he literally crosses the threshold into Reardon High School, and where he's the only other Indian there is the mascot on the wall. And so the basketball court is a place where you see this attempt to establish this kind of hybridity because he's the only Indian student there, and of course basketball is hugely popular on the reservation. So we've got on page 142 the basketball court, and we've got a drawing. And we have more elements of white culture in that drawing than we do Indian culture. Let me find that. We've got a loincloth and a headdress, but we've got just regular basketball shoes that he's wearing. So there is that bringing together, that hybridity of white culture and Indian culture, especially happening on the basketball court. He goes for his first game, and they're going to play Well Pennant, and Arnold is playing as a Reardon student. On 147, they ended up, the white school Reardon ends up losing by 30 points, and Alexei makes the comment, their tensions are running really high. The white crowd, the Indian crowd, not getting along. He says there were two white dudes from Spokane who were absolutely terrified of the wild Indians in the crowd. They were willing to do anything to make them happy. In other words, just hush up and play nice. So they called technical fouls on 4 of the players, leaving the bench and the coach for unsportsmanlike conduct. Okay, so there is that idea of, we'll just pacify you, we'll just give you what you want, just go away and leave us alone. We see a miserable failing attempt at a kind of the reverse idea, white person trying to assimilate into Indian culture when we meet billionaire Ted on page 161 and 162. This is after Arnold's grandmother has passed. And he is trying so hard to act like an Indian, and it just completely ends up blowing in his face. His drawing has all of these fake Indian clothing that he has on, sacred leather scrotum sheath, and it's actually a Kmart Naugahyde baby booty. He's got these fringed back buckskin pants, but he paid $150,000 for them from a private collector, and so on. But the interesting thing where we've got the reversal of hybridity that is a good thing comes on page 175. That's when Gordy, for the first time, validates Arnold in the classroom, when Arnold has missed so much class. The first time Gordy ever validated anything Arnold said was when he was defending his response to what petrified wood it was. Gordy was validating his answer for the sake of science, but he wasn't validating Arnold as a human. But later in the story, we see on page 175 where Gordy does stand up to the teacher. In fact, Alexei uses that word. Instead, it was Gordy who defended me. He stood up with his textbook and dropped it. Whomp. He looked so strong. He looked like a warrior. He was protecting me like Rowdy used to protect me. Of course, Rowdy would have thrown the book at the teacher and punched her. So Gordy is successfully almost hybridizing himself into Indian culture by taking a stance and appearing warrior-like. Right after that, he ends up talking to his teacher and saying it's not an Indian and white tribe. On page 176, he says, I used to think the world was broken down by tribes, black and white, Indian and white, but I know it's not true. The world's only 2 tribes, those people who are assholes and those people who are not. And of course, we go back to the basketball court. We have a different result. Arnold ends up feeling a little bit ashamed of wanting the revenge, but the ultimate natural space is kind of where everything comes together. At the end of the novel, they have their final conversation about taking their culture with them into the outside world. And that's one of the things I like so much about the novel. Hope you liked it too.